Rachel, thank you for coming to talk to us today about the impact of the changes to the Prospectus Directive on the debt and structured products market. What is the current status of the changes?
Well, the implementation deadline for the changes in the Prospectus Directive amending directive was the 1st of July 2012. Most of the member states in the EU who are real kind of active in the debt market, so we're looking at Ireland, London and Luxembourg, met this deadline. In addition, there were changes to the prospectus regulation which also came into force on this date.
So to recap, what are the changes to the form of the final terms in the base prospectus that came into force last year?
Well, the new prospectus regulation divides the information that's required to be disclosed in the base prospectus and final terms into three categories, category A, B and C. And there's very prescriptive rules regarding where the information can fall in the base prospectus or whether it's in the pro forma final terms.
And the contents of the summary, I understand that has changed as well?
Yes, that's right. Prior to the changes last year, there was no firm guidance about how a summary was to be presented. There was just a word limit of 2,500 words. The word limit has now been replaced by a word limit which is determined by reference to the size of the prospectus, and there's very prescriptive elements approach to be followed.
And does this mean there now has to be an issue-specific summary?
Yes, that's correct. So when you have a standalone prospectus, if the securities are of low denomination and require a summary, there will be a summary contained in the standalone prospectus. And for final terms produced from a base prospectus, an issue-specific summary must also be attached to the final terms.
So what are the current issues which are facing the debt and structured products market?
Well, we're still, for many issues, within the grandfathering period, and at this time issuers are now considering how best to deal with their programme updates, and they're looking at generally the structure and the content of their base prospectuses generally.
And what sort of issues are they facing?
Well, in particular for issuers of retail structured products, it wasn't uncommon previously to have a base prospectus which referenced lots of different types of underlying asset classes such as commodities, equities, indices. However, now we're seeing that competent authorities are scrutinising much more whether, in particular the retail market, a prospectus is comprehensible to a retail investor.
And you mentioned indices there. Are there any changes to the disclosure on indices generally?
Yes, there was changes that came into force in September last year, and the basic message is the disclosure requirements are now different depending on whether it's a public index, such as the FTSE, or a proprietary index, with the level of disclosure being much, much greater in respect of a proprietary index.
And the retail cascade, this is where you have sales of products through different distributors into the retail market. Has there been any changes to that regime?
Yes, there have. Again, these were changes which came into force in September last year. So now an issuer in its prospectus must give a clear statement whether it's giving a general consent to any distributor with which it enters into a distribution agreement, or a specific consent where it can name individual distributors which then have the consent to use that prospectus in their offering of the securities.
And are there any points to note on the general consent?
So if a general consent is being used, if a distributor kind of comes on board to offer the securities within the offer period, they must post a notice on their website to say that they're relying on the consent within the prospectus. If they can't use this general consent, then a new prospectus would be needed for that offer.
And is there anything that issuers need to be doing now, Rachel?
Well, I think the main message to get across is, the regime has changed and the level of work involved in a programme update is much greater than I think we've seen at any time before. And I think issuers of structured products in particular need to start thinking earlier about how they're going to structure their programme update and what products their programme generally will cover.
And finally, is there anything that issuers can do to avoid this new regime?
Yes, there are some options available. Issuers of wholesale securities may wish to move away from Prospectus Directive markets entirely. There are securities markets within the EU which aren't subject to this Prospectus Directive, such as the Euro MTF in Luxembourg, or issuers may wish to look outside the EU entirely, such as the Singapore Stock Exchange, the Cayman Islands Stock Exchange. Unfortunately, these options aren't open to issuers of retail structured products, as they will need an approved prospectus to offer their securities within the EU.
Thank you, Rachel.